So thanks for being here this evening. This is a presentation about the Pollinator Pipeline Pilot Project, which Chuck alluded to as a bit of a alliterative mouthful, but this is a project that was initiated in the fall of 2019, and we just wrapped up this past fall in 2024, so about a 5-year project. It was originally slated to be a 2-year project, but we very quickly realized that we could not have the desired effects or learn what we needed to learn in 2 years. And I'll expand on that as we go, but so long story short, we extended it finally have completed all of the work and have put together this final report. But I get to share sort of the condensed pieces with you and a lot of pretty pictures. So this was a collaborative project between multiple entities, including the Watershed Group. The Hood River Soil and Water Conservation District was the grantee. A bunch of us worked together to write the application, and the SWCD was basically the grantee. The Watershed Group was the project manager. Farmers Irrigation District was the easement holder, basically the land manager that we worked with for the actual project area. Funding was from the Natural Resources Conservation Service through their Conservation Innovation Grant. Farmers Conservation Alliance was a partner, developed a lot of the communication materials, which I'll talk about later. And then Oregon State University, Dr. Andoni Malathopoulos runs the Pollinator Extension program for OSU, and he was a key partner in developing the pollinator monitoring, doing the pollinator monitoring, and a few folks in the audience here helped out with that as well. So let's see if I can share this. So this is just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll talk about the project, the methodology that we used and sort of tweaked over time, some of the results, the impacts, and then I want to open it up for Q&A. So the reason why we wanted to do this project is because of the bee population declines throughout the world, and that the importance to agriculture, particularly in Hood River County, agriculture is a very critical part of our economy. We are the orchard county in this state, and so pollination is a really critical component of that part of our county here. And one of the biggest threats to bee population health, is the loss and fragmentation and alteration of that habitat, of their habitat. And we determined at the beginning that there really isn't a lot of research-based recommendations that land managers can use to implement pollinator benefiting measures, particularly in a cost-effective manner. There's certainly a lot of pollinator conservation research out there that's ongoing, but specifically related to some of this land management at a bigger scale, particularly right-of-ways and easements, which we have a lot of here in this valley. Speaking of, a lot of that right-of-way land that we have in this valley is irrigation infrastructure. So many of you who are local here know that we are highly dependent on irrigation for all of our orchards, crops, pasture, you name it. And that's all delivered to us through several irrigation districts in the valley, traditionally through open canals, which are porous, most of which are over 100 years old. And so there's this big push, this irrigation modernization push in the West, and particularly here in Oregon, to pipe that open canal infrastructure to save water leave more water in stream, save costs for the irrigation districts, and decrease maintenance. And so Farmers Irrigation District is a leader in that. I'll get to that in a second, actually. But there's this huge opportunity in all of this irrigation modernization that's happening because there's so far over 50 miles of canals have already been converted to pipelines across Oregon. But there's at least another 1,000 miles worth of projects that are identified, and that should be implemented. And that, as you can imagine, creates a lot of mileage, a lot of acreage that could be converted to pollinator pipeline habitat. And I just one key point on that is that you can see from this picture on the left here that a lot of these pipelines look like roads, forest roads, depending on where they are. There's buried pipe underneath this line here. But that pipe needs to be kept, there's always the potential for maintenance. So the pipeline needs to be kept low growth, so no trees, no shrubs, and able to be driven on, basically. And so this more forb and grass vegetation that's ideal for pollinator habitat is a perfect thing to reseed on these pipelines after they get buried, and instead of leaving them to be colonized by weedy material that isn't diverse and sustainable for pollinator populations. So Farmers Irrigation District, Megan is here. Megan has had to hear from me about this project for the last 5 years and has been very patient as I asked her for things. But Farmers has 2.7 miles worth of pipeline that ended up being the project site for this effort. And it was about 6.5 acres along 2.7 miles, 2 pipeline sections that there's kind of a skip in between the 2 sections. You can sort of see in this hard to see map, but this is up above Punchbowl Falls in our watershed. There's 2 stretches of pipeline, one that was about a half mile, one that was a little bit longer, that had been piped a while before this project and had become pretty weedy locations that gave us sort of a slate to do this project. Oop. So our goals were try to rehabilitate this project reach, manage for the weeds, replant it with key pollinator species, or plant species. And then throughout the pilot project, as we figured out what the best maintenance was, how to best plant and seed it, how to prepare the site, that we wanted to create a streamlined methodology that other land managers throughout the state and throughout even the region could use to best implement in their regions. And that would be adopted at a broader scale in these types of infrastructures or right-of-ways. A pollinator corridor, you can see this is actually a part of the project reach here. Farmers Conservation Alliance was really great in having lots of fancy technology like drones that took some great pictures for us and created some great videos for the project. But a pollinator corridor is basically an uninterrupted stretch of habitat or forage that pollinators can use to find basically what they need to survive. But the key point being uninterrupted. So, a one-stop shop for where they can go to find, where they can forage, where they can find nesting habitat, you name it. And so you can see kind of from this picture that these pipeline corridors create a really ideal uninterrupted stretch that fits that bill pretty well. So this is what the corridor looked like in 2019 and early 2020. So all of this dead material you can see is knapweed. So it's an invasive species that we have a big problem with here in our watershed. And you can kind of tell from these pictures that it has monopolized so when they go in and convert open canal to pipeline, they basically bury it, and then you have a long stretch of disturbed soil that's perfect germinating ground for weedy species. And so that's what happened here. Once it was piped, it became a knapweed monoculture and had just been able to reseed over time. And you will perhaps hear from honeybee managers that actually knapweed is a really popular forage for honeybees, but it is not a diverse, sustainable option. And one of the key things we were looking to do here is create a plant list and a diverse species set in these corridors that had different bloom times, that could sustain species over the course of the season, and different plants attract different species. So this was not a diverse plant population along the pipeline at the time. Other species there were thistle, yellow sweet clover, plantain, cheatgrass, which is a rough one to manage, but you can kind of see what it looks like, what it looked like to begin with. So our task was to come in, and we couldn't just come in and plant and seed this. Obviously, that would not be a successful effort. So we needed to do some site preparation in advance. So to manage for these weed species, so that we had an appropriate planting medium that wouldn't be outcompeted by weeds in 3 seconds. Oh, am I going backwards? So this is just a very quick overview of what we did over the course of the 5 years. We started with the realization that there are much smarter people with a lot more experience who could help us determine what our best methods were for both site preparation and planting and maintenance and monitoring. So we contracted with Humble Roots Nursery, which is a local native plant nursery in Mosier, and with BFI Native Seeds, which is they're up in Moses Lake, Washington. And we worked with both of them to have them develop a report for us on how what their recommendations were for implementing the project, which was incredibly helpful. You know, a lot of what they both said at the beginning was, this project needs to be longer. You will fail if you try to do this in 2 years. So, but they really helped us create a game plan. And it was a lot different than what we thought we were going to do from the start, both timing and what we thought we would. In the application, we sort of threw everything at the wall. This is what we can do, and very quickly realized that if we want this to be a replicable project that other land managers would use, it needed to be streamlined, easy to adopt, easy to incorporate into daily activities, and cost effective. So we really had to kind of shift what we were planning to do from the beginning. So site prep was several years of site prep that included herbicide treatments and sort of debris clearing and actual maintenance of the pipeline corridor itself. And we had both Humble Roots and BFI give us their best management practices for what herbicides to use and when, and how to use them. And it does seem counterintuitive to be using herbicides on a pollinator habitat project, but because of the scale of the project and because of the, as you saw in those early pictures, because of the amount of weeds along the corridor and the seed bank that was inevitably associated with those weedy populations, it was a step that we needed to take to create a usable project area. But it was a very targeted, deliberate process done outside of key pollination times when we knew that the pollinators would be using the site. We also, early on in the project, consulted with Xerces Society, and Doni from OSU provided a lot of insight on when best to do these site preparations. So a combination of herbicide treatment, a combination of clearing debris, clearing a lot of that weedy material from the site, and then a little bit of soil preparation. In a perfect world, there'd be a lot more that we would do at this type of site if we had all the funding in the world, if we had all the right equipment, but that would not be, likely would not be ideal for a land manager like the Irrigation District to implement. So we tried to make it as streamlined and effective with as minimal, I guess, as minimal effort and equipment needed as possible. And I think we were pretty successful at that, and we'll talk about that. So throughout 2020 and 2021, we did a lot of that site prep, and then we planted in the fall of 2021, both we seeded and we planted actual containers of plants throughout the project reach. Then I'll talk more about all this stuff, but we went into a maintenance phase after the planting. So targeted spot sprays for areas that were kind of repopulating with weedy material. We set up a system for watering for the first couple years to make sure that these plants, the native plants that we seeded and planted, could get established. And then throughout all this time, we were monitoring both the pollinator populations and the plants before and after, so that we had a sense, we could track and analyze our success of the project. So this is what the site looked like after maintenance. So if you can remember back to what it looked like when we started, when this was 100% knapweed, we were pretty effective in clearing the knapweed, and a lot of what you see here, there's a little knapweed florets still coming up in here. And some of this grass is cheatgrass, but there was a lot of, once we kind of cleared back the knapweed, we could see that there was a lot of native grasses and a lot of native plants there as well, including a whole bunch of poison oak, which is all along the side of this picture here. Here's some more angles of what it looked like after clearing. You can see a lot of the dead material. This is obviously a spring photo here, but you know, a lot more usable ground here for planting. This is a lot to look at, but this is, people are always interested in what our seed and plant list was. The seed mix was specifically developed for us by BFI Native Seeds, and then we purchased all of the seed from them. And you can see the grass mix, blue wild rye, California brome, Idaho fescue, and squirrel tail. And then also a forb mix as well that we kind of mixed all together. And so you can see there's a pretty interesting diversity in there. Again, all of these were selected for their variation in bloom time, their ability to thrive in a site like ours, you know, the right plants for the right place. And then the plant list you can see this shows quantities and the size, 2-inch by 5-inch pot or 3-inch by 5-inch pot, of all of the plants that Humble Roots selected and grew out for us for this project. And there's milkweeds, buckwheats, a lot of lomatium and penstemons. There's a few at the bottom that like the checker mallow that was specifically grown out and for a wetter spot along the pipeline. But otherwise, a lot of this was kind of, again, grown out for sort of the general pipeline environment. So in the fall of 2021, we did this planting. Chuck, as you can see, and Chudy, a former board member, helped me do the broadcast seeding of the entire reach on a really beautiful rainy day. The consultants, BFI, recommended that we do a harrow seeding or a drill seeding. Both of those options weren't available for us for this project for several reasons. Drill seeding and some of the more soil disturbing seeding techniques. There's a pipeline underneath this soil here, and it's at least 18 inches underground, so really not necessary. But we didn't want to do a bunch of soil disturbance, both because of infrastructure underground, because of getting the equipment into this site, and because it was largely cost prohibitive. And so this whole project was funded by a $60,000 grant, of which we needed to provide a 1-to-1 match, so $60,000 worth of match that largely came from in-kind and other just staff time, basically. So that was a really high bar for us to reach. And so we had to be really efficient with how we were spending money and what made the most sense for the site. So we ended up broadcast seeding, and I would say that it was actually really effective, in large part because we had prepped the site, and because of the seed species that we chose, and you'll note that both across the seed mixes and the plants that we planted, there's always going to be a species that ends up being the most dominant, or a handful of species that end up being the most dominant. And with grass seed and forb seed, the species that made it and bloomed and reseeded, those have continued to reseed and establish a really good population along the corridor. So it was one of the lessons learned, in that there are dominant species that are better at colonizing a site like this. And those are the ones that probably should be the biggest percentage in your seed mix. This is what it looked like with all of the plants. We didn't plant these forbs within the path that would be driven on the corridor. There were a lot of these sort of bump outs along the reach that were perfect for planting things that would grow a little taller and we wouldn't want to get run over. And so we hired a crew to come out and do all this planting for us. There were over 2,000 plants that we planted along the reach. And you can see in this picture on the left, these plants are along one stretch of the corridor. And then if you look out into the distance, the half-mile reach of the corridor is out by the rainbow. So you can kind of get a glance of the two different reaches of the pipeline. These are some pictures of year one. All of these little green florets that are popping up are Oregon sunshine. That is the most, I would say, the most dominant species that established along the pipeline, the most successful. You can see there were multiple species of penstemon that did well, some yarrow that was in the seed. This stretch in the middle here, you can see these are all seeded species. So between the grass and the Oregon sunshine and the yarrow, were some of the most successfully planted seeds. Here's another overview. You can see penstemon at the top right, biscuit root in the middle, some of the seeded materials, and this is cinquefoil in the middle, pontilla. There's even some blue flax that came in on the bottom right that came in that I was excited to see. This is what the seeded reach looked like early on in the first year of the project. So you can see it was looking pretty good. On this picture on the left, this species on the left is a native that established at the site itself. So we kind of cleared out was another example of clearing out some of the weedy material, and it's rabbit tobacco bush, I believe. But a nice little pollinator plant and a sort of unexpected addition. We did, I mentioned the monitoring that we did. This is Drew Merritt from Humble Roots on the right, who did a significant, he joined me each year to do the plant monitoring. So we could track what was establishing well, what wasn't, what kind of coverage we were getting. And we kind of developed that monitoring technique together, and it was great to have his help in that. The pollinator monitoring was implemented by OSU and Andony's team of volunteers. The first couple of years, the pre-project pollinator monitoring we did was using nest boxes. We started out with wooden nest boxes that Andony provided. It turns out, were a prime target for mice and bears. And so when we went out at the end of the season, after the first season, to collect these nesting traps, I don't think I put a picture in here, unfortunately, but they basically, we put them in spaced out locations along the corridor, and pollinators they're attractive to native pollinators to go in and nest. And so we put them out at the beginning of the season. At the end of the season, we collect them and we send them to Andony, and he incubates them and then hatches them out, and then is able to kind of categorize and identify the species that gives us a sense of who's using the corridor. But those wooden boxes, a lot of them were destroyed by curious and hungry critters along the pipeline. So the second year we used PVC pipe that had nesting tubes inside of it, and those are much more effective at capturing the bees. But we found that prior to planting, we had only about 130 bees over the 2 years that were using 130 bees total, and just a handful of species that represented that total count. So according to Andony, that's not a great abundance or diversity of species, but that kind of provided our pre-project sense. After we planted, the post-project monitoring we did was more focused on netting. And so Andony and Steve and other Oregon master, Steve, you might need to help me out with what you guys call yourselves, but we have a lot of master gardeners here, but this is the equivalent for people interested in bees.
Master melitologists.
Thank you. We had a group of master melitologists that came out 2 consecutive years, so in 2023 and 2024, to do some netting to capture and identify bees that were using the corridor after we planted and the subsequent blooms. And so this is this shows us what some of the results of that project, or some of that netting. The species on the left at the bottom are species that we planted, and on the bottom right are existing species. So that is thimbleberry, plantain, both of which are non-native species. Thimbleberry is native, but this was a non-native blackberry. And then Phacelia heterophylla is a native species. And then all the rest are species that we planted. And so what you can see here is the Eriophyllum linatum, which is the Oregon sunshine, had the greatest abundance of bees visiting it. But then there were other species in here that had a greater diversity of bee use. And that includes some of the species that we didn't plant, including the Phacelia. But you can see that there's a much broader range in abundance and use of different types of bees, because we extended that plant list and created more opportunity for forage for the pollinators that are present there. And I'm sure that people like Steve and Larry can give you a better explanation of some of this data. So if there are questions about that, I'll put them on the spot later. These are some, and a lot of the species, the vast majority of the pollinator species that were found were different, this Seratina species, so carpenter bees, different types of carpenter bees, but lots of beetles, a wide range, and maybe again, our better pollinator experts can come in and save me here a little bit, but a lot of, it was really fun to go out and when our sort of planted species were in bloom and see how much activity there was sort of at the height. These next subsequent pictures are just some of what it looks like in bloom, and some of what the key species, the kind of dominant species that have really colonized well at the site. This solidago, this goldenrod, is a really critical species to have incorporated in there because it's a late and long season bloomer. So for late season use, it's worth having in your mix. This picture on the left is the Phacelia I mentioned that was there. We did not seed it, but is doing really well at the site and has a high diversity of use. And then the penstemons, again, are really great additions to the mix. So this is just a quick overview, kind of more on the technical side. You know, we kind of went through, and this over here is Scott Sublett, one of the master melittologists who did 2 years worth of the monitoring. He's doing some of the netting along the reach there. And very, very great to have these folks to help us collect that data, and particularly because they have the knowledge of what they're looking at, and was really great match, volunteer time match. So I think we did a pretty great job of rehabilitating this stretch of corridor. You know, it's only 2.7 miles, but it's really close to important agricultural areas like the D flat, and gave us this great testing ground to understand what works, what doesn't, what perhaps irrigation districts like Farmers Irrigation District could implement. We really tried to make it cost effective and easy to adopt. We had a lot of help from stakeholders and collaborators. We developed a lot of materials that we can use to help kind of spread the word about the project, which I'll talk about in a second. we hope that this is a reduction in maintenance for districts. Megan might think otherwise, but we really tried to make it something that would be a useful, feasible result for the irrigation district. And then we've created this methodology that others can use if they choose to adopt it. And yeah. Some of the key lessons I kind of mentioned as we went through, but I think the biggest takeaway for me is that folks who are doing these infrastructure improvement projects that have a right-of-way or an easement involved, they should seed it with a pollinator mix from the start, and instead of going back and trying to rehabilitate that reach following the project. It's so much easier to work with sort of a clean slate than trying to fix it later on down the line. We could eliminate a lot of that site preparation, particularly the weed management, if we could seed it with the right species from the beginning. I mentioned this a lot, but these kinds of projects need to be something that are that these land managers will want to incorporate, that it has an added benefit for them. And so that has everything to do with what is the maintenance? Do they have staff to do it? Do they have the right equipment? Is it cost effective? I think for these projects, when land managers are considering how to implement it, both seeding methods, seeding and planting methods, site preparation methods, it's going to be site dependent. Consider all your options, how you're going to seed, how you're going to maintain the site from the beginning. My guess is that most of the time, the easiest option and the most cost-effective option will be the best chance of being adopted. And sort of related to the first one, if like many of our irrigation districts now, like East Fork Irrigation District, where they are actively piping their open canals, I think the best way to get these pollinator species planted following the piping is to include it in your project budget and include it in your contract with your construction contractor, and say they all have to do site restoration following the construction. And that site restoration should be seeding native pollinator habitat following construction. And that, in my opinion, would be one of the best ways to get that actually done. So I will stop talking at you for now. But I do want to note that at this website that Farmers Conservation Alliance hosts, there's a ton of additional materials. There's a case study one-pager that has a good overview. There's a story map within the website. There's an educational video. And then last year, we did a webinar with all the partners, including the Farmers Irrigation District manager at the time, Andoni from OSU, and the FCA folks, where it's an interesting perspective to hear about it from the partners like Farmers Irrigation District and like Andoni, who can certainly speak to the bee populations a lot better than I can. And then if you ever have interest in seeing the full technical report, that's something that I can provide as well. And you can just email me. And that would include the plant list and all of the above.
So I have a question. This is Paula Borden. So from the beginning, did you have in mind particular pollinators that you were, targeting, quote unquote, if that's the right word? Are these, you mentioned the focus was basically on supporting agriculture. Is that a particular set of pollinators that you had in mind?
Well, yes, supporting agriculture, but also supporting the pollinator species in general, and largely native pollinators that we know exist here. Beyond the I think that Andoni could tell you much better, and maybe Steve or Larry, you have a better sense of this, but you know, we were largely targeting the general native bee population that are key pollinators, and yes, for orchard crops here in the valley. And a lot of those kinds of connections have to do with, well, these are the key drivers for things like the irrigation district or other land managers. What are the connections that we can make that would help drive the adoption of this type of pollinator habitat creation?
Other question I have is what kind of maintenance of the corridor do you see might be required going forward? Because, you know, trees might grow there, and obviously you don't want trees growing on there, but you know, what sort of maintenance would be required, do you think, going forward?
So irrigation districts do that kind of vegetation management annually or when necessary. So they are pretty regularly clearing for tree growth or shrub growth. So but beyond that, one thing you'll notice in here is that, and I'll see if I can find a good picture, but you know, there's the corridor itself that we managed for the vegetation, but right off the side of the corridor, a lot of this project reach was through, you know, you can see it was through managed forest land. So either through what is now Green Diamond forest land or county forest land. And so there are a lot of bare ground stretches within this area that are host to weed seed. And so there's only so much we could do to manage for the seed bank that exists right outside of our project area. And so it's highly likely that ongoing weed management would be necessary at this site. But some of that would be mediated by the coverage that we got by the native seeds and plants that we put there. The hope would that they could be outcompete because they have enough coverage of the bare ground, so that other things can't come in and reseed. And things like the Oregon Sunshine was doing a really good job of covering that ground.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I can't see the, oh, maybe I can. Oh, hi, Steve. And I see Paula, your question. Other questions?
Did you have any feedback from, just curious, did you have any feedback from the local farms that, you know, that they saw any benefit, or was it too soon to tell maybe?
Yeah, I don't think our scale would have much of a noticeable impact. And, you know, frankly, I don't think any of the farmers down on D flat knew we were doing this anyways. But, you know, the idea would be that providing what we've learned from this pilot project would be the methodology and the best management practices that we've shared would be that others would adopt it and a much larger scale, that then would have the sort of larger effect to local farms and beyond. But there was a lot of interest from other irrigation districts. You know, when we put on webinar. We had a lot of folks from around the state that do this kind of easement or right-of-way management who are really interested. A lot of like the Pollinator Pipe Partnership, they were really interested in what we were learning on this project. So, you know, folks who do this kind of work, there seemed to be a good amount of interest, and if we are able to kind of spread the word well, hopefully that adoption will come. And now that we have that material in hand, we're going to try to push it out as best we can.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, let's give Alix a big round of applause and say thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And thank
Kinda
you
weird.
again to
To
Farmers Irrigation District, to Farmers Conservation Alliance, to the OSU partners, Steve and Scott, and everybody who went out and helped us with the monitoring. Clearly none of this project would happen if we didn't have all hands on deck. So it was a really good collaborative effort.
Yeah. Cindy had trouble with her